Good morning. Hello. Hello. To everybody here and the people joining online today, I want you to listen to these amazing words from Jesus, who said this. He says, "Do not give dogs what is sacred." I know we have a few four-legged friends with us today. So this is not to insult them. But he says there, "Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces." So, in this particular passage, we see some people are swine. Some people, unlike you and I, who are with your spiritual sensitivity, some people are evil. They cannot appreciate what is sacred and holy. It's like they have some kind of spiritual disability. You, on the other hand, you have pearls, right? You have pearls of wisdom, pearls of truth, pearls of good advice, pearls that you could straighten people out if only they would receive them. But guess what? They are just spiritual dodos, like people of other religions and people who are secular. So you should not waste your time on such people because they are just simply not worthy. That's what Jesus is saying, right? I actually took those words from quite a typical sermon on this particular passage from the Sermon on the Mount, right? Doesn't that kind of seem not really Jesus-y, the way I've just described it? This business about pearls and pigs is one of the most intriguing sayings, and it's one people have often been quite unsure what they ought to do with. A group of little children were once asked, "What does Jesus mean? Don't cast your pearls before swine." And so Jacob, who's 6 years old, he said this, "I would never give my sister my toys." Is that what Jesus had in mind? My toys are my pearls, and my sister is the swine? Is that what Jesus had in mind? Now, here's the problem with the "some people are unworthy swine who you should not help" interpretation, okay, which I've heard before. According to the Bible, quite consistently, who is the sinful, wicked, fallen, broken, all we like sheep have gone astray, messed up people category? Well, that would be everybody. Starting with you and me. Now, if Jesus is the great treasure, the pearl of heaven, then he should never have been cast into the midst of us because we are all messed up people. We're in that messed up people category. And yet Jesus actually said that it was precisely for the messed up, sinful, wicked people that he came. He said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor." I don't know if I have that. Okay, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus did not teach that we shouldn't do good things for people who might reject or misuse them. He, in fact, taught precisely the opposite. He says, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good." So let's be very clear. Jesus is not saying here that certain classes of people are to be viewed as pigs or dogs that are unworthy of our great pearls. Nobody ever taught or modeled the worth and the dignity of every human being and the universal command to love all people with the depth and the clarity and the urgency of Jesus Christ. And so the problem with giving a pearl to a pig, listen to this, this is really important for you to take note of. The problem with you giving a pearl to a pig is not that the pig isn't worthy. The problem is a pearl is not a helpful thing to give to a pig. Very few pigs wear pearls. Maybe one or two. I don't know, but not many, right? Jesus is actually getting to a much deeper problem in human relationships with wisdom that could save your friendship, that could save your marriage, your relationship with your children. See, sometimes the pearl you know you have that is so wonderful and so precious that you so badly want to give will not be wanted and will not be helpful. In that case, you shouldn't try to force it onto somebody. See, a pearl, listen to this, does not nourish a pig. And nourishment is what a pig is looking for. What will be helpful to a pig is food. If you put a bunch of slop in a trough, you'll have a happy, healthy pig. I asked Benji that this morning. What would a pig love? He says he would love mud, a muddy puddle, you know. True, he would love a muddy puddle, but he would love a trough of slop, you know. And you will have a happy and you will have a healthy pig. If you keep putting pearls into the trough, you will not have a happy pig. You will have a resentful pig. You might think, you ungrateful pig, look at the pearls that I've put before you. That won't be helpful at all. Eventually, the pig will turn and take a bite out of you. And, you know, that's what he will do, because at least you are edible, right? It's the same with a dog. You know, we love our dog Chase. We absolutely love him. But if you give him what is sacred, if you give him a New Testament or a WWJD band, you know, the What Would Jesus Do band, or a cross necklace, you know, he will do with them the only thing that he knows how to do with something. And what do you think that is? He will try to eat it. All right? Benji, our son, was given a handful of footballs one year from our friend Alfred, who was leaving the country, and he had, I don't know why he had so many footballs, but he gave Benji all of these footballs, and Chase has literally half eaten all of them. He just ripped them up and he tore off pieces off of this thing, and I guess he ate some of that leather. And the reason, I guess the lesson for Benji is simply this: don't leave what is important to you just lying around. Don't give what is sacred to a dog, not because the dog is unworthy, but because it won't be helpful to the dog. Now, this is really something important for all of us to understand. When you study the Bible, you always want to keep in mind the larger context of the passage. And we've been looking at Matthew chapter 7, and we've been looking at this week by week. Jesus is talking about the wrong ways of relating to people, to which religious people are particularly prone. 2 weeks ago, you can go online if you didn't catch that message, we saw where Jesus says, anybody remember what his King James Version says? Thou shalt not judge. Don't judge, he said. And he warns people against condemnation engineering. And then last week, we saw Jesus, he says, don't point out the speck in your brother's eye or your sister's eye when there is a plank in your own eye, right? He warns people against criticizing and blaming, projecting blame onto somebody else, because we don't want to take responsibility for our own mess. Now he says, in that context, in the same chapter, he says, don't throw your pearls to the pigs. He is still talking about the wrong way that religious people relate to others. Jesus is forbidding the practice of what might be called pearl pushing. Pearl pushing. This is when you try to push your pearls, your wisdom, your will, your way, your superior knowledge, your superior Bible knowledge onto another person, even when they don't want it, even when it's not being helpful to them. And now, if you've been through the Bible a few times, you might wonder, but doesn't pearl in the Bible always mean something of great value to Jesus? Like when he talks about the kingdom of heaven, we've been studying about these days as the pearl of great price. You've heard of that? The pearl of great price? You should know, Jesus, just like any other good communicator, often uses images quite flexibly. Like one time in Luke chapter 13, he describes that the kingdom of heaven is being like yeast because of its amazing growth. But another time, he says, beware of the yeast of the scribes or the Pharisees. There, yeast is given a negative it has a negative connotation. It's a negative thing. And so Jesus here is teaching with unforgettable humor, I think, that you have to put pearl and pig in air quotes. Pearl pushers just drift into the habit of criticizing more naturally than encouraging. And that's what a pearl pusher does. The Apostle Paul says this: let us therefore stop turning critical eyes on one another. Let me say that again. Let us therefore stop turning critical eyes on one another. That's what pearl pushers do. Pearl pushers take it upon themselves to correct everybody else because what they notice is where other people are wrong. You're wrong. And they notice that all the time. And sometimes that's all they notice. Somebody said that there are only two kinds of drivers in the world. How many drivers do we have here? I'm a driver. We have a fair amount of drivers, right? Only two kinds of drivers in the world. And you may notice this, and I noticed this particularly yesterday as we were caught in traffic on the way to Arundel. There are maniacs who drive faster than I do, and then there are idiots who drive slower than I do, right? Look at that maniac going so fast. Or, you idiot, why don't you move a little faster? You know, get out of the lane. If you look for flaws, you will find flaws. Guarantee that. Hey?
There was an accident and
there was a road closure because of an accident, that's true. If you search for faults, you will be successful. You'll go through life wondering, why don't people want to be around me anymore? You see, pearl pushing is a lonely way to live. Pearl pushers tend to adopt a tone of superiority. And the pig generally notices this. Pigs have pretty sensitive radar, right? So the teaching here is, if the pig isn't ready for your pearl, don't push your pearl. Part of love is not just knowing what to say, it's knowing when to say it. And maybe more importantly, knowing when to not say it. This is from the book of Proverbs. And it says, if anyone loudly blesses their neighbor early in the morning, it will be taken as a curse. The pig wants to sleep. Now, the pearl might be genuinely good wisdom. And this is where you need to pay attention so that you can understand what I'm trying to share this morning. The pearl might be genuinely good wisdom. And maybe the pearl is the gospel about Jesus itself. I think about a woman that I read about this week, and she really loves Jesus. And that's a good thing. She wants a husband to love Jesus, and that's a good thing. She has the spiritual pearl that she wants to give him so much. She's desperate for her husband to have this. But she kept trying to force the pearl onto her husband. She would tell him, read the spiritual book, or listen to this godly podcast, or consider these 5 proofs that God exists. She would constantly remind him, constantly, day by day, remind him. And she would say to him, I'm praying for you. And sometimes at the dinner table, while the food is getting cold and her husband is sitting right there, and the food is getting cold, like I said, she would pray for Jesus to save her husband. At the dinner table, God, won't you save this man sitting across the table from me? Have another pearl. Have another pearl. Guess what? The pig will not be happy about this. When it comes to telling other people about your faith, when people might be open to exploring God, might be open to coming to church in your community, in your sphere of influence, even amongst your family, one of the most important tips you can follow is obeying the law of supply and demand. In other words, monitor what the level of demand for the spiritual conversation is coming from the other person. Are they asking questions about God? Are they wanting to know what your story is, your testimony? Right? And so you adjust your level of supply, how long you keep talking about spiritual matters, to correspond to their level of demand, what they are asking for. If the other person is not looking at you anymore, if they're not nodding their head or asking questions or making listening sounds like, if they're leaning backwards and they stop talking, you have violated the law of supply and demand. Stop pushing your pearl and start watching the pig. Pearl pushing can happen in a marriage. It can happen in the workplace. It can happen between friends. It can happen in a church. But the place where, in my humble opinion, pearl pushing is most likely to happen and most likely to do damage is between parents and children. Parental pearl pushing is a major source of alienation in families. When our children were born, we were just overwhelmed by the thought of, that we needed to watch over every part of their lives, every single moment. We controlled when they ate, and we controlled when they slept, what they wore, where they went, who they saw, what they heard. We could mess them up, was the feeling that we had. That's a very heavy weight when you become a parent. But I think there's only one thing harder than being in control of your child's life. Do you know what it is? Not being in control of your child's life. We live with, pressure. We live with expectations and worry and hopes and love and ego all mixed up together. That's the truth for those of us who are parents. The true story. One mom who tried really hard to get her daughter to her top choice school so she could have a great life, said this: "My daughter didn't get in. I'm worried about what this means for her future. I'm really worried." That's understandable, but her daughter was only 3 years old, right? Inflated expectations and pressure can lead to pearl pushing. Sit up straight. Clean your room. Clean your room better. Get your homework done. Did you get your homework done? I don't think your model nuclear reactor is good enough to get an A, so I'm going to have to do it for you. Why aren't you more like so-and-so? Why can't you do this and that? Why won't you? Why do you disappoint me? You may not say those questions out loud, but the pigs have really sensitive radar. Everybody here had parents. The question is, how many of you really wish that your parents had given you more lectures when you were growing up? I wish I could have gotten one more talk from my dad, right? So often our kids know exactly what I'm going to say even before I've even said it. They know it. Now, the point of Jesus' teaching here on the pearl and the pig is not that I don't confront. It's not don't set boundaries that absolutely need to be set. It's not don't enforce consequences because of bad behavior. It's not that. We all need to do that. And it's part of a parent's job. Jesus' point here is don't force your wisdom on a non-receptive person. You cannot control any other human being. They have their kingdom. It's not your kingdom. You cannot make sure any human being turns out right. You have to let go. You have to make space for God. God is the only one who can enter into their little kingdom at the deepest level. In particular, for those of us who love God and who follow Jesus, I know what we want more than we want anything else is for our children to love and know and follow God as well as we do. We want that. I know there is maybe nothing more painful for a parent than to know that the greatest treasure of their life is unwanted by their child. I read about a man who had a child pretty late in life, and he said that his prayer was, God, do not give me a child unless that child will be a lifelong Christian. See, what he wanted was a divine guarantee that he would have a no-risk child when it came to faith. I don't want the pain of having to love a child who does not hold faith as I do. That's what he was saying. I'm not sure I would want to be that man's child. I'm not sure I'd want to carry that kind of weight, because God made everybody to be free to choose. God makes people free, even at the cost of great pain to God Himself. God makes people free, and God loves people even when they use their God-given freedom to reject God. He makes the sun to shine. He causes the rain to fall on people who love Him and people who shake their fists in His face. Now, this is why in a spiritually flourishing church, everybody, not just the parents, but everybody owns helping our children, our students, our young people grow up rooted in faith. In faith in God, in life, and in love. I read this week that very often churches, there will be a goal when it comes to caring for children in their children's churches or their children's ministries, that there's for kids, that when it comes to caring for kids, there's a 5-to-1 ratio. In other words, the church will want to have one volunteer for every 5 children or every 5 students, one volunteer leader for every 5. And that's a good thing. However, people who do research about faith development say that you really need to flip that ratio. They say the biggest predictor of a child remaining committed to God when they grow up is having a multi-generational team, a family, a group who is pouring into them. So here's the thing, if you're a parent, what you really want is a team of 5 adults who will want to enhance your child's faith development. And that team could include grandparents. We have one in fact we have a great-grandmother, excuse me for saying that, in our kids' lives, who loves my children and wants to have one-on-one with them. And every now and then you might see grandma taking one of our kids out there and having a little chat. That's what we want. We love that. And that could include uncles and aunts. It include volunteer leaders. Maybe it includes somebody who's in your Connect group or your Bible study with you. You know, it's a weird thing about children, and I don't fully understand this, but I have seen it firsthand, right? There will come a time when they don't want your pearls anymore, as great as your pearls are, but they'll want somebody else's pearls. I read about this professional football coach for a world-class football team, right? And his son was going to high school, and he started playing football for the school, and he was expending a lot of energy doing that, right? A lot of energy. But all he would eat for breakfast would be these yogurt bars. You know what I'm talking about? They sell multi-packs. We buy them for our kids. I love these now and then, but it's not like they have the greatest nutrition in the world. Am I right? Bit of sugar there, bit of carbs, but that's about it. He told his son about the science of nutrition, and he was talking to his son about training. Remember, he's a world-class football coach, right? And he's trying to impart wisdom to his son because he knows this stuff. He lives it. He trains professional footballers, and he's talking about nutrition and training and how his son needs a bigger breakfast, right? And he's getting this from a professional, award-winning coach. And guess what? The son doesn't respond at all. One day, his dad comes downstairs and his son was fixing this great, incredible breakfast. Eggs, bacon, oats, fruit. And the dad was so glad that finally the pearl had gotten through. So he couldn't resist commenting, "Hey, son, you're fueling up today, mate. Well done." And the son says, "Well, yes, my coach said I needed a bigger breakfast." His dad, the football legend coach that he was giving him wisdom, but no, he's dad. So the pig doesn't want that pearl. You know, we all own together helping to pass that torch of faith to the next generation. You all do. And I would just want to say, as your pastor, I'm so grateful for every single one of you, every person who volunteers your time, your energy, and your heart to love our children. Not just my kids, but all the kids that do come here, to love the kids of SCC, South City Church, to pour into them, to help them know and love God. Thank you. If you're a parent, and I know there are some here, and you love your child, but they've grown up, and they're far from the faith. I do know some of those stories. They're far from God, and you know this. You get to love them. I want you to know that you get to love them and care for them no matter what, and you can will and you can work for and you can pray for their good, and I know that some of you do that. You really do. But guess what? Their story is not over. God loves your child more than you do. God's heart breaks over your child more than your heart breaks. So you can just release your child into the hand and the care of God. And I say this to all of you who are parents. You are responsible to your children. You are not responsible for your child. That is a burden you cannot carry. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. This is one of the things pearl pushers have to learn. And so, just as I end, there's a story about what can happen when you stop looking with a critical eye, when you stop trying to force your wonderful pearls all the time. It's a story of fiction, and I want to tell it to you, and then I want to tell you the story behind that fictional story. And it's a story about a grade 5 teacher, Mrs. Thompson, and a grade 5 boy that she did not like. His name was Teddy Stellard. Teddy did not play well with other children, and his clothes were kind of a mess. He was just unpleasant to be around. He was kind of disruptive. He was kind of uncooperative. And it got to the point where she kind of took delight in just putting a lot of red ink on his papers so that he knew that he wasn't doing so well. And that kind of made her feel good. And it wasn't until halfway through the year, when she was reviewing his files, that she learned Teddy's story. See, everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. Teddy's grade 1 teacher wrote this: Teddy is a bright child with a ready laugh. He is a joy to be around. His grade 2 teacher wrote this: Teddy is an excellent student, well liked by his classmates, but he is troubled because his mother is very ill. Life at home must be a struggle. His grade 3 teacher wrote this: Teddy's mother's death presents at the end of the year, wrapped in beautiful ribbons and bright shiny paper, except for Teddy's. Teddy brought her a present, but it was quite clumsily wrapped in the heavy brown paper he got from ripping up an old grocery bag. And Mrs. Thompson was quite careful to open it in the middle of the other presents. Some of the children started to laugh when she found an old rhinestone bracelet with some of the stones missing, and a bottle that was about 1/4 full of just some cheap perfume. And she stifled the children's laughter when she exclaimed how pretty the bracelet was, and she put it on, and she started to dab some of that perfume on her wrists. Teddy Stallard stayed after school that day, just long enough to say to his teacher, Mrs. Thompson, today you smell just like my mom used to. And that bracelet really looked pretty on your wrist. After the children left, she cried for about a half an hour. On that very day, she quit teaching reading, writing, and maths, and instead she began to teach children. Mrs. Thompson paid particular attention to Teddy. As she worked with him, as she saw something good in him, his mind seemed to come alive. The more she encouraged him, the more she believed in him, the faster he responded. By the end of the year, Teddy had become one of the smartest children in that class. 6 years later, she got a note from Teddy. He then wrote he had finished high school, second in his class, and 4 years after that, she got another letter saying that while things had been tough at times, he would soon graduate from uni with the highest honors. And then 4 years passed, and eventually another letter came. This time the letter was signed Theodore F. Stallard, MD. He told her he'd met a girl, and he told her he was getting married. He'd asked if she'd come and sit in the place where his mother would have sat, the place of the mother of the groom. And guess what? She did. She wore the old bracelet, she wore the perfume he gave her, and when he thanked her for being the best teacher he'd ever had, she told him that he had it all wrong. He was the one who taught her. See, that story was written by a woman named Elizabeth Ballard, and she said that it was triggered by 2 real-life events. Once was a time when she had been a Sunday school teacher, and because she was a follower of Jesus, and Jesus, the same Jesus who said, "Don't cast your pearls before the swine," she was teaching, and a grubby little boy had given her a rhinestone bracelet and a little bottle of cheap perfume. And that moment reminded her of when she was a little girl, and she grew up in a family that was quite impoverished. She had no money, so she bought her teacher a gift of pecan nuts from her tree in the garden the one year, and all the other students started to laugh, and her teacher stopped them. Her teacher saved her by saying that she was going to make a fruitcake. And this is just what she needed to hear. Now, of course, the teacher wasn't really going to make a fruitcake. Nobody makes a fruitcake. Okay, fruitcakes just happen, right? Just like accidents and sinkholes, right? And I think the reason the story has touched so many people is that we forget every day we will choose the eyes that we use to see people. Eyes of judgment or eyes of love. I don't know about you, but I think the world is kind of tired of Christians trying to force their pearls on them. I don't think it's actually our job to try to go around day after day correcting people, fixing people, giving advice to people who are not asking for it, and explaining everything that is wrong with the world and what is the problem with this group of people and what is the problem with that group of people. And why don't these people behave like this? Why don't they behave like we think they should? I kind of think, guys, that it's time for followers of Jesus to just come alongside people and offer hope and healing and some humility and some servanthood and some generosity and some love. This week, this is your homework. No pearl pushing. No condemnation, no condemning, no superiority, no comparing, no blaming. So, I know in closing that raises the question, if you're not supposed to relate to people by judging or condemning, and if you're not allowed to force advice on them, and you're not supposed to do relationship by criticism, then how are you supposed to relate to people? What are you supposed to do if you're concerned about something, or there's a real problem where you want one thing and they want another thing? Jesus has a way. It's actually the simplest, best practice for human relationships on earth. It always unites people. It almost magically puts you on the same side. It's how we are to relate not only to other people, but also how we are to relate to God. It's the basic operating system for relationships in the kingdom. And we'll talk about that next week. But for this week, no pearl pushing, no judging, no condemning. Just remember that story about Teddy. And as you go from one relationship to another, ask God this question: God, would you help me to see what you see when you look at this person? Would you help me to think what you think when you look at this person, and feel what you feel, and say what you say? Then a little bit of the kingdom will come from up there down to here, through you, and flow to them. Yeah? Let's pray.